David pushed open the heavy glass doors of the downtown conference center. Coffee in one hand and his laptop bag slung over his shoulder. Another Monday morning. Another mandatory training session. This time it was about workplace diversity and inclusion, something the company rolled out every few months like clockwork. He'd been through these sessions so many times over his 8 years at the marketing firm that he could probably give the presentation himself. Same slides, same role-playing exercises, same awkward conversations about unconscious bias. David wasn't opposed to the message, but the delivery always felt rehearsed and distant. The conference room was already half full when he arrived. He nodded to a few colleagues and chose his usual spot in the back corner. Close enough to look engaged, far enough to check emails if things got boring. The morning sunlight streamed through tall windows, casting long shadows across the polished table. At exactly 9 o'clock, the facilitator walked in. David glanced up from his phone and immediately felt something shift. This wasn't the usual corporate trainer they'd seen before. This woman moved with quiet confidence, her presence filling the room without saying a word. She wore a simple black blazer over dark jeans, her natural hair pulled back in a neat style. There was something about her that made David sit up straighter. "Good morning, everyone," she said, her voice warm but professional. "I'm Dr. Amelia Rivers, and I'll be leading today's session on building authentic connections across cultural differences." David found himself paying attention in a way he hadn't during these trainings in years. Dr. Rivers didn't start with the usual PowerPoint presentation. Instead, she asked everyone to think about a time when they felt truly understood by someone who was completely different from them. Human connection isn't about ignoring our differences, she explained, walking around the room with easy grace. It's about recognizing that our different experiences and perspectives can actually create stronger bonds when we approach them with genuine curiosity. She had a way of speaking that made complex ideas feel simple and relatable. David noticed how she made eye contact with different people as she talked, how she paused at just the right moments to let important points sink in. When she laughed at someone's comment, it wasn't the polite chuckle most trainers gave. It was genuine and infectious. "I want to share something with you," Dr. Rivers continued. "I'm a cognitive psychologist, and I've spent years studying how people from different backgrounds form deep connections. What I've found is that the strongest relationships often start with intellectual curiosity about each other's experiences." David felt his usual conference room boredom melting away. This wasn't just another diversity training. This was actually interesting. Dr. Rivers talked about research on empathy, about how understanding someone's thought processes could create bonds that went beyond surface-level similarities. During the first break, David surprised himself by approaching the front of the room. He told himself it was just professional curiosity, but there was something magnetic about the way she explained. "Human psychology, that research you mentioned about intellectual connections," he said, trying to sound casual. "Do you think it works both ways? Like, can understanding how someone thinks actually change how you see them as a person?" Dr. Rivers smiled, and David noticed small laugh lines around her eyes. "That's exactly what I've been exploring. When we truly understand how someone processes the world, it creates a kind of mental bridge. We start seeing them not just as different, but as fascinating." Their conversation flowed naturally from theory to personal experience. David found himself sharing stories about his own background, growing up in a small town, feeling out of place when he first moved to the city, learning to navigate corporate culture. Dr. Rivers listened with the kind of attention that made him feel like his experiences actually mattered. "I think that's why these trainings often fall flat," she said thoughtfully. "They focus on what makes us different instead of helping us discover what makes each other interesting." When the break ended, David returned to his seat with a strange energy he couldn't quite name. For the rest of the session, he found himself hanging on every word. Dr. Rivers had a gift for making psychology accessible without dumbing it down. She talked about mirror neurons, about how our brains are literally wired to connect with others when we pay attention to their mental patterns. "Here's something fascinating," she said during one segment. Research shows that when we're genuinely curious about someone's thought process, our brains actually start to sync up with theirs. We begin to think in similar patterns, even if we come from completely different backgrounds. David felt a strange recognition when she said this. He'd been thinking about her words long after she'd moved on to the next topic. There was something about her mind, the way she connected ideas, the way she saw patterns in human behavior, that felt almost magnetic. As the session wound down, Dr. Rivers handed out her business card. To anyone interested in follow-up resources, David took one. Running his thumb over the embossed text, he told himself it was for professional development, but he knew it was something more. "Thank you for today," he said as the room emptied out. "This was actually the first training session I've attended that made me want to learn more instead of just check a box." She gathered her materials with the same graceful efficiency she'd shown all morning. "That means a lot to hear. I believe these conversations are too important to be boring." David laughed. Mission accomplished. "I haven't taken this many mental notes in a conference room since college." As he walked back to his office, David realized something had shifted. Not just his perspective on diversity training, but something deeper. He kept thinking about Dr. Rivers' words about mental bridges and intellectual curiosity. For the first time in months, he felt genuinely excited about an idea, about understanding how someone else's mind worked. He spent the rest of the day distracted, replaying moments from the session. The way she'd explained complex research with such clarity, how she made everyone feel heard during discussions, the genuine interest she'd shown in his questions. That evening, David found himself looking up Dr. Rivers' research online. He told himself it was purely professional curiosity, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something significant had started that morning, something that went beyond just learning about workplace dynamics. He stared at her business card on his desk, wondering if reaching out would be appropriate. After all, she'd invited follow-up questions, but David knew his interest wasn't entirely academic. There was something about her mind, her way of seeing the world, that had captured his attention in a way he hadn't experienced in years. The rational part of his brain reminded him about professional boundaries and appropriate behavior, but another part, the part that had been dormant for too long, was already composing an email about psychological research and human connection. David closed his laptop and headed home, but Dr. Rivers' words about mental bridges kept echoing in his mind. He wondered if she'd felt any of the same intellectual spark he had, or if he was just another participant in another training session. Either way, something had awakened in him that morning, a curiosity about human connection that felt both professional and deeply personal, and he knew this was just the beginning of something he didn't yet understand. 3 days after the training session, David found himself staring at Dr. Rivers' business card again. He moved it from his desk to his wallet, then back to his desk, unsure what to do with it. Finally, he decided to send a brief email asking about some research she'd mentioned during the session. He drafted the message 5 times before hitting send, trying to strike the right balance between professional curiosity and genuine interest. When her reply came back within an hour, warm and detailed, David felt a flutter of excitement he hadn't experienced in years. "Your question about cognitive empathy is fascinating," she wrote. "I'd be happy to discuss this further. There's a coffee shop near the university where I often work on research. Would you be interested in continuing this conversation sometime this week?" David read the email 3 times before responding. Coffee felt casual enough to be appropriate, but personal enough to mean something. They arranged to meet at a small cafe called The Grind on Thursday afternoon. When David arrived, Dr. Rivers was already there, laptop open, surrounded by books and papers. She looked up when he approached, and her smile made him realize he'd been more nervous about this meeting than he'd admitted to himself. "I hope you don't mind the chaos," she said, gesturing to her workspace. "I'm working on a paper about cross-cultural communication patterns, and I tend to spread out when I'm thinking." David sat down across from her, ordering a coffee and trying not to stare at the way she organized her thoughts on paper. Her handwriting was neat but energetic, with little arrows connecting different ideas. he found himself wanting to understand her process, to see how her mind worked through complex problems. "Tell me more about what sparked your interest in cognitive empathy," she said, closing her laptop to give him her full attention. What followed was the kind of conversation David hadn't had in years. They talked about psychology, about how people from different backgrounds could truly understand each other, about the difference between sympathy and empathy. Dr. Rivers had a way of listening that made David feel like his thoughts were worth exploring. "I think what interests me most," David said, surprised by his own openness, "is how you can feel connected to someone's mind before you really know them as a person. Like, understanding how they think becomes almost more intimate than knowing their history." Dr. Rivers nodded thoughtfully. "That's exactly what my research suggests. When we truly understand someone's cognitive patterns, we're accessing something very fundamental about who they are." Their coffee meeting stretched into 2 hours. David learned that Dr. Rivers had grown up in Atlanta, that she'd always been fascinated by how people's minds work differently, that she'd chosen psychology because she wanted to build bridges between communities. She asked him about his background, about what had drawn him to marketing, about how he'd ended up in Chicago. "I never thought about marketing as psychology before," she said, "but the way you describe understanding your audience, it's not that different from what I do in research." David felt a warmth spreading through his chest that had nothing to do with the coffee. "I never thought about it that way either, but you're right. It's all about getting into someone's head, understanding what makes them tick." As they talked, David found himself noticing things beyond just her words. The way she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear when she was thinking deeply, how her eyes lit up when she talked about her research, the way she laughed, not politely, but genuinely, like she was truly enjoying their conversation. When they finally parted ways, David felt energized in a way he hadn't in months. That evening, he found himself crafting a follow-up email, sharing an article he'd found about marketing psychology that he thought might interest her. Her response came back the next morning, along with a research paper she thought he'd find fascinating. This became their pattern, emails that started professional, but gradually became more personal. David found himself checking his phone constantly, hoping for her messages. He began to look forward to their exchanges more than anything else in his day. "I've been thinking about our conversation about cognitive bridges," she wrote in one email. "Do you think it's possible to feel mentally connected to someone you've only known a short time?" David stared at the message, his heart beating faster. It felt like she was asking about more than just research. His reply was carefully worded but honest. "I think some minds just click, regardless of time. Like finding someone who thinks in the same language you do. Even if you come from completely different places." Their next coffee meeting happened the following week, and David noticed the conversation had shifted. They still talked about psychology and research, but Dr. Rivers shared more personal stories. She told him about her family, about the challenges of being a woman in academia, about her dreams beyond research. "Can I ask you something?" David said during a pause in their conversation. "What made you want to study how people connect across differences?" Dr. Rivers was quiet for a moment, stirring her coffee thoughtfully. "I think because I've always felt like I existed between worlds. Growing up, I was often the only person who looked like me in academic spaces. I learned early that real connection happens when people are genuinely curious about each other's inner worlds, not just their surface differences." David felt something shift in his chest. "That makes so much sense. I've been thinking about what you said about mental bridges. I think that's what's been missing in my life. Genuine curiosity about how other people think. And how does that feel?" she asked softly. Having that curiosity awakened, David met her eyes across the table. "Honestly, it feels like coming alive in a way I didn't know I was missing." The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was charged with understanding. David realized that their intellectual connection had become something deeper. Without him fully noticing, he was drawn to her mind, yes, but also to the person behind. Those thoughts died as they walked out of the cafe together. David felt the cool evening air and noticed how naturally Dr. Rivers fell into step beside him. Their conversation continued effortlessly. moving from psychology to personal philosophies to shared observations about the city around them. I should probably head home, she said when they reached her car, but I've really enjoyed these conversations. David, it's rare to find someone who's genuinely interested in understanding how minds work. David watched her drive away, already composing his next email in his head. He was falling for her thoughts, her perspective, her way of seeing the world. But he was also increasingly aware of the person behind those ideas, intelligent, warm, curious about him in return. That night, David lay in bed thinking about their conversations, about the way she looked at him when she talked about mental bridges, about how their exchanges had begun to feel like the most important part of his day. He was beginning to understand that intellectual attraction could be just as powerful as any other kind, maybe even more so. He wondered if she felt the same pull he did, the same sense that their minds had found something rare in each other. Tomorrow, he decided, he would write her an email that was a little more honest about what these conversations meant to him. The thought both thrilled and terrified him. 2 months into their friendship, David found himself looking forward to Dr. Rivers' messages more than anything else in his day. Their conversations had evolved from professional curiosity to something much deeper. They talked about everything: childhood memories, career dreams, philosophical questions about life and human nature. I've been thinking about something, she wrote in an email one Tuesday morning. You mentioned that you feel like you understand how I think. I'm curious, do you think it's possible to know someone's mind better than they know it themselves? David read the message 3 times, his coffee growing cold as he considered her question. There was something different about this email, something more personal than their usual exchanges. He crafted his response carefully. I think when two people really connect mentally, they can see patterns in each other that might be invisible from the inside, like how you can see the shape of a forest from above, but not when you're walking through it. Her reply came back within minutes. That's beautifully put. I feel like our conversations have given me a new perspective on my own thoughts. Would you like to continue this discussion in person? I'm working on a research paper tonight, and I could use a thinking partner. David stared at the invitation, his heart racing. Dr. Rivers had never invited him to her home before. All their meetings had been in neutral spaces, coffee shops, the university library, a park bench near campus. This felt like crossing into new territory. I'd love to help, he typed back. What time works for you? That evening, David found himself standing outside a brownstone apartment building, holding a bottle of wine and questioning whether bringing it was appropriate. Dr. Rivers had said they'd be working, but something about the invitation felt different from their usual meetings. When she opened the door, David was struck by how different she looked in her own space. She wore a comfortable sweater and jeans, her hair loose around her shoulders. Without the professional setting, she seemed more relaxed, more herself. Come in, she said, smiling warmly. I hope you don't mind the organized chaos. I tend to think better when I can spread everything out. Her apartment reflected her personality in ways that fascinated David. Books lined every wall, organized by subject but with interesting connections between different fields. African art hung next to psychology journals, plants filled the windowsills, and soft jazz played in the background. This is amazing, David said, taking in the space. I feel like I'm getting a glimpse into how your mind works. Dr. Rivers laughed. Is that a good thing or a terrifying thing? Definitely good, David replied, and meant it. Everything here makes sense together, even though it seems random at first glance. They settled on her couch, papers spread across the coffee table. Dr. Rivers was working on a study about how people form emotional connections through intellectual exchange, as she explained her research. David found himself watching her more than listening to her words. There was something about seeing her in her own environment that made their connection feel more real. The way she curled her legs under her while thinking, how she absently played with a pen when she was concentrating, the small smile that crossed her face when she found the right way to express a complex idea. You're not listening to me, she said suddenly, looking up from her notes with an amused expression. David felt heat rise in his cheeks. Sorry, I was just thinking about what you said earlier. About knowing someone's mind. What about it? David hesitated, then decided to. Be honest. I was thinking that I feel like I understand you in a way. That's different from how I've known other people. Like I can predict how you'll respond to ideas. Or what will make you laugh. Dr. Rivers set down her pen and looked at him more intently. That's interesting. I've been feeling something similar. Sometimes when I'm thinking through a problem, I find myself wondering what you would say about it. Like your perspective has become part of how I process things. The admission hung in the air between them. David felt a shift in the atmosphere, as if they'd acknowledged something that had been building for weeks. Is that normal? He asked quietly. For people to become part of each other's thought processes like that? According to my research, it's actually quite rare, she said. It suggests a deep cognitive connection. When two minds start to synchronize, it usually means they're compatible on a fundamental level. David felt his pulse quicken. And what does that mean for us? Dr. Rivers was quiet for a long moment, her eyes searching his face. I think it means we've moved beyond just being friends who have interesting conversations. The honesty in her voice made David's breath catch. I've been thinking the same thing, but I wasn't sure if it was just me. It's not just you, she said softly. I've been wondering what it would be like to know you in other ways, not just intellectually. David felt the weight of her words, the invitation and vulnerability wrapped up in them. I've been wondering the same thing. But I didn't want to assume anything or make you uncomfortable. You're not making me uncomfortable, she said, moving slightly closer on the couch. If anything, I'm comfortable with you in a way that surprises me, like my mind recognizes yours. David looked into her eyes and saw his own feelings reflected back at him. I feel like I've been getting to know you from the inside out, understanding how you think before knowing all your stories. And how does that feel? She asked. Echoing a question she'd asked him weeks ago. It feels like the most natural thing in the world, David admitted, and also like the most intimate thing I've ever experienced. Dr. Rivers nodded slowly. I think that's what real connection is supposed to feel like. Not just physical attraction or shared interests, but genuine understanding of how another person's mind works. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, both processing the significance of what they'd acknowledged. David felt like they'd crossed a bridge they couldn't uncross, moved into territory that was both thrilling and uncertain. So where does this leave us? He asked finally. Dr. Rivers smiled, and David saw warmth and possibility in her expression. I think it leaves us being honest about what we've both been feeling, that our intellectual connection has become something deeper. And you're okay with that? I'm more than okay with it, she said. I'm excited about it. It's been a long time since I've met someone who challenges me to think differently, while also making me feel completely understood. David reached out and took her hand, surprised by how natural the gesture felt. I feel the same way, like I've been waiting for someone who could match my thoughts, and also make me want to be better at thinking. As they sat together on her couch, surrounded by books and research papers, David realized that what they'd built together was unlike anything he'd experienced before. It wasn't just attraction or compatibility. It was a meeting of minds that had grown into something profound. I have to ask, Dr. Rivers said with a slight smile, are you going to be able to focus on helping me with this research paper? Or are we going to spend the rest of the evening talking about cognitive connections? David laughed, feeling lighter than he had in months. I think we might be doing both at the same time. Good, she said, squeezing his hand. Because I have a feeling our best thinking happens when we're doing it together. As they turned back to her research, David felt the evening settling into something new and wonderful. They were no longer just friends exploring ideas together. They were two people who had found something rare and precious in each other's minds, and were brave enough to see where it might lead. The week after their evening at Dr. Rivers' apartment, David found himself in unfamiliar territory. Their relationship had shifted into something deeper, but he wasn't sure what that meant or where it was heading. The intellectual connection that had started everything was still there, stronger than ever. But now it was layered with emotions he wasn't sure how to navigate. He spent his lunch breaks thinking about their conversation, about the way she'd looked at him when she said her mind recognized his. It was the most honest thing anyone had ever said to him, and it both thrilled and terrified him. On Thursday, David decided to take a chance. He texted Dr. Rivers asking if she'd like to come over for dinner on Saturday. Not for research or coffee, but just to spend time together in his space the way they'd spent time in hers. "I'd love that." She replied, "Should I bring anything? Just yourself." David typed back, then immediately worried if that sounded too casual or too intense. Saturday evening arrived with David feeling more nervous than he'd been since college. He'd spent the afternoon cleaning his apartment, cooking a simple pasta dish, and trying to make his space feel welcoming without seeming like he was trying too hard. When Dr. Rivers arrived, she looked around his apartment with the same curious interest she'd shown everything else about him. His place was simpler than hers, fewer books, more space, everything organized in clean lines. "This is very you," she said, smiling as she took in the minimalist decor and the few carefully chosen pieces of art on the walls. "I can see how your mind works just by looking at this space." They shared dinner at his small dining table, conversation flowing as easily as it always did. But David could feel something building beneath the surface, questions he needed to ask, things he needed to understand about what was happening between them. "Can I be honest about something?" David said as they finished eating. "I hope you always will be," Dr. Rivers replied, her expression becoming more serious. David took a breath, trying to find the right words. "I've been thinking about what you said last week, about our minds recognizing each other. And I keep wondering if I'm attracted to you for the right reasons." Dr. Rivers tilted her head slightly. "What do you mean?" "I mean, I'm drawn to your intelligence, your perspective, the way you see the world. But I also know that part of what fascinates me is how different your experiences are from mine. And I worry that maybe I'm attracted to those differences in a way that's not healthy." David watched her face carefully, afraid he'd said too much or revealed something ugly about himself. But Dr. Rivers didn't look offended or uncomfortable. Instead, she looked thoughtful. "I appreciate you being honest about that," she said finally, "because I've been thinking about the same thing from my side." "You have, David. I've spent my whole career studying how people connect across cultural lines. I know how easy it is for attraction to become complicated by stereotypes or assumptions. I'd be lying if I said I hadn't wondered about your motivations." David felt his stomach drop. "And what did you conclude?" Dr. Rivers was quiet for a moment, choosing her words carefully. "I think what we have is more complex than simple attraction to differences. Yes, our different backgrounds and experiences are part of what draws us to each other. But that's not the same as fetishizing those differences." "How do you know them?" "Difference, because you're interested in understanding me, not just in the idea of me. You ask questions about how I think, not just about what it's like to be me. You see me as a whole person, not as a representative of my race or my profession." David felt some of the tension in his chest ease. "I do see you as a whole person. That's what scares me sometimes, how much I want to know everything about how your mind works, and that's what makes this feel genuine to me," Dr. Rivers said. "Because I feel the same way about you. I'm not attracted to you because you're different from me. I'm attracted to you because of who you are as a person." They moved to the couch, the conversation becoming more intimate as they settled into the comfortable furniture. David felt like they were navigating something important, something that would determine whether their connection could grow into something lasting. "I want to tell you something," Dr. Rivers said, curling her legs under her in the way David had come to love. "I've been in relationships before where I felt like I had to choose between being seen as intelligent or being seen as a woman. Like, I couldn't be both. That sounds exhausting. It was. But with you, I feel like you're attracted to my intelligence, not intimidated by it. Like you see my mind as part of what makes me attractive. Not despite it." David nodded, "because it is. I've never been more attracted to anyone's thoughts before. The way you process ideas, the connections you make, it's like watching someone create art. And that's what makes this feel different for me," she said softly. "You're not trying to simplify me or reduce me to something easier to understand. You're interested in the complexity. I'm interested in the complexity, David admitted. Maybe because I'm tired of simple. I want to understand how you think about everything, big ideas, small moments, the way you make sense of the world, and I want to understand the same about you. Dr. Rivers said, I want to know how your mind works when you're solving problems, when you're reading, when you're just sitting quietly. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, both processing the weight of what they'd shared. David felt like they'd crossed another bridge, acknowledged something deeper about their connection. So where does this leave us? David asked, echoing the question he'd asked the week before. I think it leaves us being honest about what we want. Dr. Rivers said, I want to keep getting to know you, all of you, your thoughts, your perspectives, your experiences. I want to understand how your mind works in all the different contexts of your life. And I want the same thing, David said. I want to know how you think when you're happy, when you're frustrated, when you're excited about something. I want to understand the patterns of your mind. Dr. Rivers smiled, and David saw something settled and sure in her expression. Then I think we're on the same page. We both want to know each other deeply, authentically. That feels like a good foundation for whatever this becomes. As the evening wound down, David felt a sense of relief and anticipation. They talked through the complexity of their attraction, acknowledged the potential complications, and decided to move forward with honesty and intention. Thank you for being so honest tonight, Dr. Rivers said as she prepared to leave. I know these aren't easy conversations to have. Thank you for being willing to have them. David replied, I think that's what real connection requires, being brave enough to examine our own motivations, and being brave enough to trust each other with the truth, she added. As David watched her drive away, he felt more certain about their relationship than he had since it began. They'd looked at the complexity of their connection and decided it was worth exploring. They'd been honest about their fears and their hopes, most importantly. They'd chosen to trust each other with their authentic selves. David knew that whatever happened next, they'd build something real and honest, a connection based on genuine understanding rather than surface attraction. The thought both excited and calmed him. Tomorrow, he decided, he would start planning something special for them to do together, something that would let them continue exploring the fascinating complexity of each other's minds. 6 months after their first meeting, David found himself packing for a weekend trip that felt both natural and significant. He and Dr. Rivers had decided to spend a few days at a cabin by the lake, away from the city and the distractions of daily life. It wasn't officially a romantic getaway, but David knew it represented something important in their relationship. The cabin was rustic but comfortable, surrounded by tall pine trees and overlooking a peaceful lake. When David arrived, Dr. Rivers was already there, sitting on the porch with a cup of coffee and a book in her lap. This is perfect, David said, taking in the view. I can see why you chose this place. I thought we could both use some time to think without the noise of the city, she replied, standing to greet him. And I wanted us to have space to continue the conversations we've been having. They spent the first evening settling in, cooking dinner together, and talking about everything except the elephant in the room. David felt the familiar comfort of their intellectual connection, but underneath it was something new, a tension that had been building for months. The next morning, they took a long walk along the lake. The autumn air was crisp, and the trees were beginning to change colors. David found himself walking closer to Dr. Rivers than usual, aware of her presence in a way that went beyond their usual mental connection. I've been thinking about something, she said as they paused to look out over the water. About what you said months ago, about understanding someone's mind being more intimate than knowing their history. What about it? I think you were right. I feel like I know you in a way that's deeper than just facts about your life. But I also think there's something we haven't talked about. David felt his heart rate pick up. What's that? Dr. Rivers turned to face him, her expression serious, but warm. I think we've been so focused on our intellectual connection that we've been ignoring other kinds of connection, physical, emotional. Like we've been afraid that acknowledging those feelings might somehow diminish what we have. Mentally, David felt a rush of relief at her honesty. I've been thinking the same thing. I've been having thoughts about you that go beyond just appreciating your mind. What kind of thoughts? She asked softly. David felt heat rise in his cheeks. Thoughts about what it would be like to be close to you in other ways. About what it would feel like to hold you, to kiss you. About whether our physical connection could be as strong as our mental one. Dr. Rivers smiled, and David saw something warm and inviting in her expression. I've been having similar thoughts. I've been wondering what it would be like to be with someone who understands my mind so completely. They walked back to the cabin in comfortable silence, both processing the weight of what they'd admitted. David felt like they were standing at the edge of something new and wonderful. That evening, they sat together on the couch by the fireplace, closer than they'd ever sat before. Dr. Rivers had changed into a soft sweater and comfortable pants, and David found himself noticing the way the firelight played across her face. I want to tell you something, she said, turning to face him. I've been in relationships before where I felt like I had to choose between being intellectual or being romantic, like men couldn't handle both sides of me. That sounds lonely, David said. It was. But with you, I feel like you're attracted to all of me. My thoughts, my personality, my physical presence. Like you see them as connected, not separate. David reached out and took her hand, marveling at how natural the gesture had become. Because they are connected. I can't separate my attraction to your mind from my attraction to you as a person. They're part of the same thing. I feel the same way about you, she said. I'm attracted to your intelligence, but I'm also attracted to your smile, your laugh, the way you listen when I talk. It's all part of who you are. David felt something shift in the air between them, a recognition that they were finally ready to acknowledge all aspects of their connection. So what do we do about it? I think we stop pretending that intellectual connection and physical attraction are separate things, Dr. Rivers said. I think we admit that we want to know each other in every way possible. David felt his breath catch. And what does that look like? I think it looks like being honest about what we want. And I want to be close to you, David, mentally, emotionally, physically. I want to explore all the ways that people can connect. David moved closer to her on the couch, his heart racing with anticipation and nervousness. I want that too. But I also want to make sure we're doing this for the right reasons. What do you mean? I mean, I want to be with you because of who you are, not because I'm fascinated by the idea of you. I want to make sure this is real for both of us. Dr. Rivers smiled, and David saw certainty in her expression. David, what we have is the most real thing I've ever experienced. We've built something from the ground up, based on genuine understanding and respect. That's not going to disappear because we acknowledge that we're also physically attracted to each other. You're right, David said, feeling some of his nervousness ease. I think I've been overthinking this. We both have, she said. But I think that's part of what makes this so special. We've thought about it, talked about it, made sure we're both sure about what we want. David reached up and touched her face, gently, marveling at how soft her skin was. I'm sure about what I want. I want to be with you in every way possible. Then what are we waiting for? She asked. Leaning into his touch, David leaned and kissed her, softly at first, then with more confidence as she responded. It felt like a natural extension of all the conversations they'd had, all the mental connections they'd built. But it also felt like something entirely new, a physical expression of the bond they created. When they broke apart, both were breathing heavily. David felt like he'd crossed a threshold he couldn't uncross, and he was thrilled by the feeling. How was that? Dr. Rivers asked, smiling. Perfect, David said. Like everything else about us, it felt completely natural. They spent the rest of the evening talking and kissing, exploring this new dimension of their relationship. David felt like he was discovering her all over again, the way she felt in his arms, the way she responded to his touch, the way their physical connection seemed to enhance their mental one rather than replace it. The next morning, they took another walk by the lake, this time holding hands. David felt a contentment he'd never experienced before, the satisfaction of being with someone who understood his mind and also wanted to be close to him physically. I feel like we've figured something out, Dr. Rivers said as they watched the sun rise over the water. About how to integrate all the different ways people can connect. I think we have. David agreed. I don't feel like I have to choose between loving your mind and being attracted to you physically. They're part of the same thing, exactly. And I think that's what real love is supposed to feel like, not just one type of connection, but all of them working together. David stopped walking and turned to face her. Did you just say love? Dr. Rivers smiled, not looking embarrassed by the admission. I did, because I think that's what this is, David. I love your mind, your personality, your physical presence. I love how you make me think and how you make me feel. I love all of it. I love you too, David said, feeling the truth of it settle in his chest. I love everything about you, your intelligence, your curiosity, your kindness, your beauty. I love how you've changed the way I think about everything. They kissed again, surrounded by the peaceful sounds of the lake and the morning birds. David felt like he found something he didn't even know he was looking for. A person who could match his thoughts and his feelings, who could challenge him intellectually and also make him want to be better in every way. As they walked back to the cabin, David realized that their story was just beginning. They built something rare and precious, a connection that was mental, emotional, and physical all at once. And now they had the rest of their lives to explore where it would lead them. So what happens now? David asked as they reached the cabin. Now we go back to the real world and see how this translates to daily life, Dr. Rivers said. We keep talking, keep learning about each other, keep building on what we've started. And we stop overthinking everything, David added, laughing. Definitely. She agreed. We trust what we've built and see where it takes us. David felt a sense of excitement about the future that he hadn't experienced in years. He was with someone who understood him completely, who loved all aspects of who he was, and who wanted to explore the world together. It felt like the beginning of something beautiful and lasting. As they packed up to leave the cabin, David knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together with their minds, their hearts, and their complete trust in each other. They had found something rare, a love that was both intellectual and passionate, both thoughtful and instinctive. It was exactly what he'd been searching for without knowing it.